All right, how are we doing out there, ladies and gentlemen? Hope you are fantastic. Let's talk a bit about resistance and social change as well. We're looking at resistance to state rule in general, specifically some things like some slave rebellions, but also some internal resistance to some of the oppression and stuff like that we're seeing in this period as well. So let's check it out. All right, first off, we're looking at internal resistance to state power. So states in this period, we're going to have a lot of control and authority. Remember, we're talking about absolute monarchy is a big factor here. More and more countries are trying to become more absolutist, and so as they are doing this, then we're going to see rebellions and resistances against them. So, for example, in France, we know, of course, that Louis XIV is going to, try to push them, or he will successfully push them more towards absolute monarchy, and we'll see that earlier on, also with other groups like Louis XIII and others. So, in 1648 to 1653, there is a military conflict going on, and so there are edicts for taxation across France, and this is really going to upset the elites of France. Okay, these are not like, this is not a peasant rebellion, but these folks are called the Fronde, probably Le Fronde, and they are going to revolt against the crown, and they will lose this revolt. They will be suppressed. And so this is oftentimes seen as one of the examples of the establishment of absolute monarchy in France, is the failure of the elites to be able to resist against the power of the absolutist governments. We also will see something similar in Russia in the 16th and 17th centuries. Serfdom was reinforced, and that upset a lot of Cossacks and peasants. So we end up having this rebellion called the Pugachev Rebellion in 1774. It ultimately will fail, and that will lead to more oppression of the Cossacks and the peasants. So far, not so good. 0-2 for the resistors. But we will have a little something different here. The Glorious Revolution in 1689. Remember, we have a couple of examples here in Britain of just the chaos that's coming about due to absolute monarchy, as well as some of the things here that we're talking about with Catholics versus Protestants. So if you remember, James I is the new king after the death of Elizabeth. Then his son, Charles I, will be in charge. But Charles I first has his head cut off for some of these issues. We'll have Oliver Cromwell for a bit, then Bonnie Prince Charlie, Charles II will come in, and then afterwards James II will be the king. But he is a Catholic, he is seeking absolute power. This upsets a lot in Britain, and so basically he is forced to flee in what is known as the Glorious Revolution. Really not much of a military conflict at all, mostly they just kind of he kind of runs away, and instead this couple called William and Mary were given the throne. Mary is James's daughter, and William is like a distant cousin, because that's how you do with royal families, but they basically had the right to take over, and they did. This bronze that's above me here, you can see, is from the Fronde. You can see the King of France up there above me, and he's oppressing people with his foot upon the head of the Fronde. All right. Now, we're also going to see some resistance in the colonies, not only internal resistance. So, for example, Metacom's War from 1675 to 1678. Metacom is often called King Philip for some reason by the English. And so it's also known as King Philip's War. An uprising in British colonial America. There's a local Wampanoag chief who led an uprising, but that uprising is ultimately unsuccessful. The British are able to suppress it. In 1680, then, we will have something known as the Pueblo Revolt. In modern-day New Mexico, the Pueblo Indians revolted against Spanish authority and forced conversions to Christianity. It was successful, but the Spanish will return only about 12 years later. Interestingly, this guy here, this is Pope. He is one of the leaders of this Pueblo Revolt. Every state gets two statues to put in the capital, and so his one of New Mexico's is a statue of Pope, which you can see here. Maroon Wars, 1728 to 1740. We talked about this in the last set of slides. We also have Maroon Wars from 1795 to 96. These are escaped slaves who rose up against the English. In the latter part of it, then, we have a leader known as Queen Nanny, who is a woman Maroon, who is going to be the leader of some of this resistance. We also have an example called the Gloucester County Conspiracy. Yeah, that word is not pronounced Gloucester, it's Gloucester County. Conspiracy, these are white and black who are both forced labor. So the black, obviously, are going to be chattel slaves. The white are going to be indentured servants, and they actually, for a brief period of time, realized their combined unfortunate situation, and so they will do their best to try to resist that. Ultimately, though, it is also unsuccessful. So not a particularly successful list there in the colonies. Mainly just the Europeans are so militarily strong, it's difficult for them to be successful. Let's take a look at some external resistance to state power then. One example here is this lady named Anna Nzinga. In 1624, she became the ruler of a country called Ndongo. So if you look at this map that's here behind me, the map, like kind of inset thing there that you see is the Kingdom of Congo. Right below that then, that sort of yellowish kind of weird... Let me see if I don't think I can get there. Yeah, my hand's disappearing. But anyway, you see at the bottom there, that kind of yellowish shape there. That is the Kingdom of Ndongo. And then there's another kingdom called Matamba, which is right behind it. So it's wild. She basically negotiated to end slave trading with the Portuguese, which is successful. But then her alliance with the Portuguese broke down, and they started to invade and try to take over, take more slaves. So she flees and ends up in this other kingdom called Matamba, which she takes over, which is amazing. And then she returns to defeat Portugal and take them out and prevent them from slaving on her coast anymore. The Maratha then, from 1680 to 1707, these folks fought against the Mughals. They were Hindus from South India, and in the course of this rebellion, they will effectively end Mughal rule. There are going to be Mughal leaders until, I think it's like 1800 something, but in fact, there's still a guy today who's supposedly a Mughal leader. But they are basically going to disappear over time, and the Maratha are a big part of that. All right. Let's talk a bit about new social hierarchy. So the new money, the new other places that we have here are going to cause people to reevaluate sort of what their situations are and how these different groups are going to work. So one example of that from these gunpowder empires, we have the Ottomans. So they have a warrior system, these ulama scholars who are scholars of the Quran and of Islam, the janissaries, viziers, peasants, and slaves through this whole system. Women had varying power, like depending on where they were and who they were, but the elites had a lot. One example of this is Roxolana, who was a powerful wife of Suleiman the Magnificent. She had a significant influence over her husband and really controlled this harem and what's known as harem politics. The Mughals were famous for their tolerance, which is unusual at this time, so that social hierarchy is sort of interesting. It's less a hierarchy because of their tolerance. The Qing dynasty then, which are going to take control of the... which are taking control of that area of, or taking control of China, are ruled by the Manchu. The Han were determined to be, were demanded to be subservient to the Manchu. So, for example, one thing they had to do, every man had to have this haircut that we see up above us here. This is the Q hairstyle. If you did not have this haircut and you were a Han Chinese, then you could be executed, arrested and executed for resistance against the government. Manchu forces led massacres against resistors in a lot of places, but eventually the Manchu were pretty accepted because they adopted a lot of the similar ideas that we find from Confucianism and Taoism, etc. All right, looking at Europe then for some of our new social hierarchies. Aristocracy made gains, but often lost it as well. So it kind of depends on the location. In England and the Netherlands, there was kind of an increase in noble power. So, like, for example, the expelling of James II and bringing in of William and Mary is going to be an example where the aristocrats are fairly powerful. On the other hand, then, in France and Russia, there's kind of a decrease of that noble power. So a closer push towards autocracy. Also, unfortunately, we talk about the Jewish people as well. And their bad experiences here. Jewish people had variable experiences. In 1492, the Jews were expelled from Spain, for example, but they were welcomed into the Ottoman Empire. So there was some tolerance there. The Ottomans were like, please come here. You have a lot of skills. We're more than happy to take you. And due to the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, prejudice will fade, but it never really goes away, of course. And in fact, we're seeing that as I'm recording this in 2022. There's tons of horrible stuff out there about a rise in anti-Semitism, which is an absolutely horrible thing. All right, lastly, looking at new social hierarchies in the Americas, specifically in the social world of the Spanish in Latin America and Central America. We are talking about some new social hierarchies here. This is known as the castas system in Spanish America. So you can see over there on the right was one example of this sort of like pyramid, and over on the left we have some examples as well. So basically what happens here is that the system really gets kind of like broken out. There are not as many Spanish women that come over, so the Spanish men tend to have relationships with Native Americans or African slaves or other groups. And so what we see then is there's a lot of racial intermixing in these areas, and so they end up sort of creating this sort of social social structure that is going to divide these different groups. So at the very, very top here, we have a group of people called Peninsulares. These are people from Spain. They were born in Spain, they came over to the Americas, and they are in charge. So like your governors of Mexico or something are usually going to be Peninsulares. There are not very many of them, though. Right below them, then, are the Creoles, okay, or Criollos. That word you see a lot for a lot of different things, but in this case it means the group of people who are of Spanish descent. Okay, they are Spanish, but they were born in the Americas. So if you were born in Mexico City, but both your parents have been Peninsulares, then you are considered to be a Creole and therefore lesser than the Peninsulares. So you would be like a high-level advisor to the governor, or maybe a major figure in the government, or a general, or something along those lines. Then the next group, which is going to make up the majority of peoples, we're going to have what are called the castas. This is going to be mestizos, who are people of European and Indian descent. We have a group called mulattoes. Now, make sure you understand that is not a polite term in America. That is a term here that is used in a historical sense. So don't be using that phrase around people that you know who maybe are of mixed races. But this is a group of people who are Europeans and African ancestry. And then lastly, we have what are called zambos. These are folks who are of mixed African and Indian ancestry. So they're the bottom of the castas, but they're still going to be above slaves and indigenous peoples as well. Okay, so at the very bottom there, we have slaves and indigenous peoples. This one over here on the left, which by the way is from John Osborne, that's my dad's name. This one over here on the left then has African slaves at the bottom and Native Americans right above them, which is probably the case, but I mean they're really treated basically the same because of the prejudices of the Europeans. All right. There you go. A nice quick hit on some social hierarchies and some resistances. Check them out. Again, what you're really looking for here is the ability to talk about it. Like if it talks about what is a new social hierarchy in the world in Unit 4 in that time period or whatever, you want to be able to talk about the casta system, or you want to talk about, you know, these other systems we talked about already, like the Qing Q system, right? Or alternately, if it talks about resistance to slavery or resistance to state power, you want to be able to talk about the Marathas, or you want to be able to talk about you know, Anna Nzinga and groups like that as well. So make sure you know some of those folks and can talk about them on your essays. That's it for me, folks. Thanks so much. I appreciate y'all being here, and y'all take care.